Hey Dad,
Good day, Jamie.
how you doing?
I'm doing great, and I have a different background because I wanted to put a dead plant in here instead of a bare wall.
I like it. I put in all of my vacuum cleaner and laundry over here.
I kind of noticed that.
Thank you. Did you like the change in scenery?
Yeah, well, it's something to talk about.
I'm gonna keep my shoulder like this.
Oh, that's perfect. Good
Yeah,
job.
now it's clean, except for that thing. Um, okay, I'm excited for today.
I am too. Good topic for us.
Yeah. Okay. So book bans. That's what we're talking about today, right?
That's it. And here's the thing we want you to do. Before we get going on the topic, we want to get people to think of their gut reaction to the term book ban. And
Yes.
it's something just to digest for a few seconds before we start the discussion. But it's all over to you, Jamie. Go ahead.
Okay, which we did, right? So we are trying to record these in sort of live, you know, I don't know what, in these live scenarios, but sometimes when we're prepping for these episodes, we just already start the conversation.
We do.
Yeah. So we've had a conversation about this. We've had a lot of conversations about books, about I think when we say book ban, we mean the big umbrella term, right? Which contains a ton of things: book challenges, book access, who's deciding who gets what access to which books and when. We're talking about book editing, book restriction, all of that information access, right?
Yeah, and the reason we wanted to use this topic is for us. It's a topic where we draw lines at different places under different circumstances, and we think that's probably a pretty common practice for people. You might have a standard that you're applying to today's reason for a decision that you might be looking at. At least we do that, and that might be different on a different occasion. Today, the Constitution and freedom of speech may be a reason for you to take a particular position, but under certain circumstances, public safety or something could cause you to say, well, yeah, that's to a certain point, the Constitution is the most important thing to me. And that's why we thought for ourselves in having this conversation, we get to the point where there's different reasons for decisions depending on the particular application of the day.
Totally. So as we're chatting, Dad, I'm just gonna kind of reference a couple of things from our framework that we've been talking about a little bit. I think for us, when we're talking about this, a lot of times the objective is tied in with the parameter, right? So when we talk parameters, we're saying like, yes, there's the big giant umbrella, but today we're talking about this specific issue. And I think a lot of times that parameter that we set determines our objective for the conversation for the day. I'll give an example. Right before we started recording this, we were just having a conversation about the author who edited Mark Twain. So the books were edited to remove the N word and I think one other offensive term, and some things were subbed in. And we were having a very specific conversation about that topic.
Yeah, and it is one of those things where, again, different people have different positions, and maybe on different days you might have different positions on it, depending on what the audience is or depending on what the circumstances might be about its consumption.
Yeah,
And I don't have a problem personally with Jamie, with anybody publishing, putting up anything they want to put up about their thoughts on these topics. It's when people have a way of saying, well, I don't think others should consume something because of something that I believe necessarily. And I think that's where we have to say, how do we practice this in a way that makes sense to the bigger audience, and what's the application and who's making decisions on those fronts?
of course. Or like when we're talking about, let's say my kids, what I decide they can read at home or see at home versus what they're seeing in a classroom versus what they're seeing in their school library and the public library. Those are all different levels of access. And where does my ability as a parent to determine what they have access to, uh, you know, maybe come into conflict with other people's determination around what they have access to, or where does mine supersede those people's ability to limit or provide access to those topics for them?
Right. Well, Jamie, like we were talking about too. I mean, here's this case here where I think people do what they can do in the surroundings that they can affect. Um, you might have opinions about something, but you may not have a place to apply what you're thinking, or a way to apply what you're thinking. But when we're looking at parents, parents are doing the best they can in their home environment, understanding that children are going to be out in society and may be exposed to things that parents don't have complete control over. Or a school library may be able to have a particular standard that they're applying today. But again, that may or may not apply in a public library available to everybody, to adults as well as children. So it's people doing what they can do in the places that they can do it, or influencing the processes in the places where they have an ability or an authority to have comment or make a difference on those particular fronts.
Yeah. And I think that one of the things when we're talking about book access more generally that you and I end up talking about quite a bit, um, it falls into kind of two camps, right? We have like uh current and contemporary topics that some people feel uncomfortable with being taught in school. And then we have historical texts that people may feel uncomfortable with the language or the setting or whatever it might be in that text. And those two feel slightly different. Um, in terms of how people either restrict or allow access for certain students at certain ages. And I think the thing that I'm really interested in that, both for myself and when we're having this conversation, is how do your opinions around that change when we go back to sort of this idea of gatekeepers? When we're thinking about, okay, I love that my school librarian provides access to X, Y, and Z because I really support those things. But what happens when the school librarian suddenly is providing access to things that I don't support? Or vice versa, what if the librarian is restricting access to things that I really like? But would I want them to do that for things that I agree with? And so does that, how do our personal opinions about the content change the way that we feel about the enforcement of restriction and access?
That's why this is such a great topic to introduce the framework in, as it applies to an issue, to a topic. Because I think what we've found in talking to people so far is that people have different positions on banning or restricting access depending on circumstances. And that's a good thing, because I think what it causes you to do, what helps us do, is say there's a flexibility in how I look at certain issues. And that application might be helpful to look at in other issues as well, but it's when we're here, you can see it more transparently than you might see it in other topics. Because like I said, today, this might be the standard I'm applying, but tomorrow, under different circumstances, I might have a slightly different standard that I'm looking at applying, and that might trump that other position that I had before. And that's a good thing. It's good to say, where am I coming from on this issue and why? What are my sources for how I feel about this topic?
Yes.
And again, what are the other people's, what's the other person? Jamie, what are your sources? Because
Yes.
that helps me understand what you are thinking about and why.
Yep.
And it also helps me understand that under different light, under different circumstances, that may change for me and for you. Good thing to understand, very good to understand. And it's helpful in looking at the undivided framework that we've come up with in on the fly as those things kind of change. How do you adjust your conversation to that? Jamie mentioned before the Mark Twain language in Huck Finn. Um, that's one way of looking at it, and that's people might have their positions on that.
Yep.
But that may be only one way of seeing it. And as you mentioned, something else changes on that, and another publication comes up for discussion, and I might think differently
Yep.
about that. Very helpful in assessing my own positions and in looking at your positions too, Jamie, and what you think, and asking you more questions about that. What's behind that? Why do you think that on this particular topic?
I think that's exactly right. And the thing I love about this topic is it makes us question our own assumptions about ourselves and other people, right? So just because I'm making this up right now, but just because you don't want particular access to this title for a kid doesn't mean that you actually are opposed to that book. Maybe it means you don't like that particular edition, or you don't like the way it's being taught, or whatever that thing could be. And because I'm coming at it from like everything, it should be available all the time, or whatever, I'm making things up right now. But
Yep.
instead of that, instead of me applying this, oh, that person wants to restrict children's access to whatever, I can actually ask, do you want would your kid ever read this with you? Would your kid read this at a different age? Have you read this book? Do you know what it's about? These kinds of things that can provide more nuance to my understanding of where you're coming from.
Well, and nobody comes at this issue that I know of saying everything should be available to everybody under all circumstances. I don't know of anybody who has that position on whatever would be available in, for instance, a school library. Should anything be out there that's ever been published, should that be available to our children? And I don't think there's anybody either really that would take a position that we don't want anything available to our kids. I'm the only person I'm the gatekeeper, and the school shouldn't give them any. That's not out there either, really.
I
So
actually, both of those are out there.
Well, okay, very few. And what causes you to look at that issue is under certain circumstances, we each have different positions.
Yes.
I mean, you and I, Jamie, each look at these things kind of topically, looking at each one of them and saying, well, this is how I would look at that, maybe a little differently than how you posed it to me before. If it's somebody rewriting Mark Twain for this reason, or if it's access at a certain age versus whatever, there's maybe different ways, nuance, that I might look at that and say, this is how I would see it. One other thing I want to mention between you and me, I think we have a generational gap in how we look at things too.
Or gap isn't maybe the right word. I would say difference.
Okay, generational difference in how we look at it, but it is something that I think longer term exposure to it for me has caused me to look at it in a different light than how you would look at it with a shorter term, more focused exposure. And I think that helps us, you and me, looking at these topics like that, to be aware of that generational difference is helpful.
And I think it's also interesting from an understanding point, because I really think that, one, I need to, sometimes step back a minute and ask some questions. Like, okay, this is different for me, the experience I have, say, parenting now than when you were parenting, or the things I read as a kid versus what you read as a kid. And when I can take into context sort of the longer frame of the way that you've had access and not over the years, I think there's a lot of room in there for me to learn.
Yep. I think that is, and again, perfect topic for an introduction, because it is one that we can help. It's not something that people take so personally as some topics that make it more difficult. This is one that is more looking at how we apply it outside, not necessarily to ourselves so much. And so it's one that's easier for us to look at and study a little bit about this framework that we've developed.
And I'll just give a tiny example of one of the reasons I think this does provide more flexibility. So something that I think kind of falls under this category that I know I've had conversations with lots of parents about is access to, say, like health and wellness information for kids, right? And I know numerous parents who have very different approaches to what they teach their kids when, about sexuality, about growing, about hormones, about whatever that might be. And there actually isn't a lot of disagreement between parents about the different approaches to that. It's just kind of accepted that people are going to have different approaches to that, which, again, in the environment that I'm in right now is fairly unusual. I would say where I live, there are not a ton of topics that people are very open to having different and varied opinions on in a way that is friendly and accepting. And this is one of the ones that is. I think people know that culturally, with different backgrounds, with different access and information, people have and make different decisions about how they're going to give that information to their kids or bring it into their families or whatever that might be. And it does or doesn't influence the way we feel about that at the school, but it's something that we've had conversations about for how we handle that personally. So I know that there is flexibility in people's opinions around that topic, which is, I think, similar to this in general.
We wanted this to be the introductory topic for another reason too. Inevitably, in the coming weeks, months, whatever the case might be, there's going to be an issue that comes to the fore on this very topic. And we think it's helpful for you to have in your own head, be thinking about how you apply this, your thinking to this particular topic.
Yep.
And Jamie, I don't know what the next topic is going to be, what it's going to be, where it's going to be, but it comes up every month or two. There's another
Totally.
way of looking at it for some
Totally.
people. So this is a good one for us to be able to open the door today and see how we might view other chapters of the same dialogue as they come
Chapters. I
up.
like that.
Yeah. So this is a good one, and that's one of the reasons we wanted to ask you to think about your gut reaction. Jamie and I have done this with some other people too. Ask them just what's your gut reaction to the term book ban, and see where that takes us, and then also look for where we ourselves or others are show that we maybe have different ways of looking at different aspects of the same topic.
Yeah, and I think that you're right, Dad, because I mean, we already had, I think we had 3 or 4 different instances in the last maybe 2 to 3 months that have come up in the news around access, right? I mean, and I'll just throw a couple out there that we aren't going to have time to hit on, but like there's a ton of stuff happening in Florida right now around school curriculum and book access. There's the Mark Twain thing that we already talked about. There's the Scholastic Book Fair information that came out recently. There's a ton of stuff that's happening right now. And like maybe I didn't already say this. Banned Book Week happened back in October. So there's this comes up regularly in kind of different contexts. It is a timeless issue, and it's a great kind of sandbox for us, for people to be testing this out. So, like Dad was saying, we would love to know if you try this out. We're hoping you'll have these conversations. We'd love to know how it goes. You can reach us at ourhouseundivided@gmail.com. You can also reach out to us on Instagram. I think that one's just House Undivided. But we'd love to know, are you having these conversations or trying to have these conversations? Are you interested in having these conversations? And I think this is what I was saying. I'm interested in knowing, are you generally having these conversations with people you agree with or people you disagree with? And if it's the former, are you interested in having conversations with people that you don't agree with? Dad and I do this all the time, and we find it enjoyable. So
That's why we're here.
yeah, we love this. So we're curious about your thoughts. We'd love to hear from you about how it's going. We're going to post this on YouTube, and we'll post a link to it in our Instagram account, on the Instagram account. But yeah, we'd love to hear from you.
More on this topic later.
Yes,
Thank
and
you, Amy.
others. Yeah, thanks, Dad. Love you.
Love you too.
Bye.
Bye.